But now that it is Monday, and yes, we are still dealing with a pandemic, our good friend Dr. Dennis Norem from MercyHealth has joined us once again for a discussion on some of the latest. Dr. Norem, good morning to you.
Good morning to you guys. Is it really November?
Yeah, I know. See, everybody who thought, Arizona would be a better place to live than here, boy, they're laughing out of the other side of their face this morning, aren't they?
Yes, they are. I think it's probably going to be warmer here than Arizona today.
Yeah, it's very nice, but it's going to make a turn that will make people glad they considered residency. But we'll get into that when we start to freeze a little bit later on. Hey, what do you make of the news this morning that Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine news is out, and they're saying that it's proven to be 90% effective in the first 94 patients it was tested on?
That's very encouraging. I mean, that's the kind of thing we're looking for from vaccines, is in the 90% plus effectiveness. That has been a big concern with all these numerous vaccines, is how effective are they going to be, especially given the fact that we've seen over the past few years some of our flu vaccines have fallen kind of short in terms of efficacy.
When we get to 90% effectiveness, the good news, obviously, I think we all know that this has been with Operation Warp Speed. That's what we're calling this right now. I think getting this ready to go. Usually vaccines, 5 to 10 years. What shortcuts were made to get this done in a little over a year? And do any of those shortcuts concern you when this comes out?
They don't concern me if ultimately this situation with the vaccines is approved by the FDA. I think the shortcuts occurred at all levels, and certainly Operation Warp Speed was really the kind of the overall construction that created shortcuts at every level. And I hate to call them shortcuts, but just the fact that they were able to speed everything up from, purchase, research, study, manufacturing. And I watched 60 Minutes yesterday, and there was a good presentation on the distribution part of it, how it's going to be distributed and who's in charge and what kind of plans have already been made, how it's going to be tracked, what the security is. So all of those things have occurred within a very short time frame, which is very impressive.
I watched that 60 Minute special too, and I forget the 4-star general's name in charge of it, but he was very impressive. One of the stats that they did bring up was, I think it said around 70% of doctors would be comfortable taking the vaccine right now. Only 40% of nurses would have been comfortable with that. How do you explain that?
That was very discouraging, and he said, I think, a couple of times, shame on us. Somehow we've created this perception of vaccines over the past few years that they're dangerous and there's side effects, and, we have this social media campaigns against vaccines, and he was very blunt about that, and he was very impressive. I think he really has a handle on what's going on. So we need to continue to educate the public. I can't imagine that healthcare facilities are going to allow people to work when there's a vaccine available and not have them take the vaccine, just like we do now with multiple vaccines. We have to have a flu shot to work at the health system, unless you have an allergy or just simply can't take a flu shot.
And I noticed the numbers where they were talking about only 40% of nurses, that the American public is not far off that number as a whole, as far as comparing them to nurses. We're looking at that 40% or below margin who said they'd be willing to step up and roll up a sleeve.
Yeah, I think there's been a couple of different surveys on this within the last few months, and it's been right around the 40-50% range for the general public, which is disturbing. I really think nurses would do better than that. I'm just not sure of the source of that survey.
And piggybacking on that one, this is the Pfizer one that we're talking about. They're not the only organization that has been putting forth an effort to come up with a vaccine, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think reading about Operation Warp Speed, I believe they've contracted potentially with 14 different companies to potentially distribute their vaccine. They're hedging their bets to see on which one gets approved first, which one may be more effective. So, no, they are not the only one. There's, several others, and according to their website, I think there's almost nearly 14 companies that they're working with.
Will there be one, for lack of a better term, a winner of all these? If this Pfizer one gets approved and we can start doing that, sometime at the beginning of next year, and then April comes around and another one pops up. Is that all? Well, medically speaking, would that be all right having two different vaccines running through the population?
Oh, absolutely. We currently, for other viruses, including flu, we have several different companies that make those vaccines, and some have some advantages over others. I believe, and I can't remember if the Pfizer is a 2-shot vaccine.
If that was the one from last night, the Pfizer was a 2-stage one, yeah.
And obviously, if somebody comes up with a very effective 1-shot vaccine, some people will prefer that one as opposed to the 2-shot. So the more effective vaccines we have, the better.
Can you explain to me, like I'm 5, how a 2-stage vaccine works?
Probably not with any good detail.
Okay.
But I think that,
I'm thinking of the shingles vaccination. I got the shingles, and that was a series of 2.
Okay.
Correct. I think what they've found is it boosts the immunity more effectively if you split the challenge into 2 shots as opposed to 1. That's about as the simplest terms I can put it.
Are they 2 separate shots? I mean, do the shots contain the same thing?
I believe they do.
Okay.
I know with the shingles vaccine, those were the same formulation. You just received it 2 different,
Okay.
2 different times.
All right, because in my head, maybe I thought maybe the first one was setting it up for something, and then the second one comes in and
there was a prep vax,
Yeah.
and then the main ingredient body comes next time.
Yes,
through.
but this is basically just doubling up the portion and making sure everything attaches the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, again, don't quote me on that, but I believe that is the same formulation. And it's somewhat similar to what we've seen with the flu in the past. During certain flu seasons, there have been recommendations to revaccinate some patients and if the flu season lasted well into the spring. So it's not uncommon to have these 2-shot vaccines. And things like hepatitis B is actually a 3-shot vaccine. You get the same dose at the beginning, at 1 month, and 6 months. So depending on the virus and the body's immune response, you can have multiple shots.
Right. Yeah, I can remember a friend getting bitten by a woodland animal of some sort when I was a kid and went in for these series of rabies vaccinations.
Right. Yes, and that's multiple shots.
Yep.
I believe it. 6. I haven't looked at that recently.
Yeah, it was a lot more than he had bargained on. Let's put it that way.
You don't want to have to go through that.
No, petting zoos were never going to be a thing for him ever again. Hey, when is what you guys talked about? Because I didn't see this, and I know some of the information's out there. You talked about distribution. Who's going to be first in line? What are you talking about as far as time frame for a rollout of this stuff?
I think they're looking at January. From some of the articles and what's on their website, the general said they're ready to go. If they get the okay, they have vaccine already sitting in warehouses ready to be distributed, just depending on who gets approved first. So they're expecting, I think, to be able to roll something out the first of the year.
Switching gears a little bit, I think all 3 of us are in agreement that kids need to be back in school, and school's the better mode for them. A lot of districts, I know in the area, I've visited some friends out in the suburbs this weekend, they're doing it too. We're going full remote here until at least through Thanksgiving. Do you see that extending through the end of the year? And should they?
I think it's probably not a bad idea. That we're seeing this spike, no question. Hospitalizations are spiking up. I see that we're approaching 4,000 a day, which is just a 500 less than our peak back in May. And the thought is, with the holidays and people getting together, maybe a little time out isn't a bad idea. hopefully by the first of the year we might see this spike peak, things go back down, and then kids can get back into class. So I can't argue with that idea that taking a couple weeks off over the holidays, maybe extending that even into the Christmas holiday, is not a bad idea.
Dr. Norm, I've got a question as I look at what Europe is doing. Hungary unveiling its toughest virus measures yet. Some other countries are Portugal and Hungary. They're hunkering down. More lockdowns are coming. And the World Health Organization, a couple of weeks back, sort of backflipped on their original COVID-19 stance after calling for world leaders to stop locking down countries and economies. You got Dr. David Nabarro from the World Health Organization appealed to world leaders, telling them to stop using lockdowns as your primary control method of the coronavirus. He claimed the only thing that lockdowns were achieving was poverty and depression, with no mention of potential lives saved. Quoting him here, lockdowns just have one consequence that you must never belittle, and that is making poor people an awful lot poorer. We in the World Health Organization do not advocate lockdowns as a primary means of controlling the virus.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And as we've gone along, we've kind of learned that in some ways lockdowns are effective depending on how they're administered. You know, the idea that one size shoe fits all hasn't worked. You try to lock down everything, and the consequences, I think, are, as we said, pretty dire in terms of economics. However, when you have outbreaks, you may need to lock down certain areas, certain types of facilities, and we've talked about this, like nursing homes and assisted living. Maybe you have to lock those down. But I think as we've gone on, we've kind of learned that maybe there's other ways of being as safe. And the thing that the lockdowns haven't stopped is the fact that a lot of the transmission now is occurring within homes. And we found this all along, where people who live together are transmitting it amongst their family members, which a lockdown does really very little to stop that kind of transmission. So it's I know, controversial, and unfortunately we're going to know a lot more in a year from now than we know now about the best way to approach this.
Testing and tracing is two of the big boys that we talk about a lot. I have noticed that once we see this vaccine light in the end of the tunnel, that talk has kind of evaporated. Do we still need to worry about testing and tracing? Are there any new developments to make those a little bit more effective in the last couple of weeks here?
We shouldn't lose sight of testing and tracing. It's still the best way to control this pandemic. I see we're up to 115,000 cases a day because we continue to improve testing. Some of the newer tests and the rapid tests, which we've talked about, hopefully we'll have more of the rapid testing available for people, which I think also would be a big help.
I think we've had that set on this segment for about 2 months now, that hopefully we'll have more rapid testing available soon. Is soon coming?
Eventually.
Okay.
Eventually. It just hasn't really caught on with, I think, the major suppliers of testing, including the hospital systems and the health departments. And again, it's just because of the concern about reliability. But I'm sure that somebody's going to come up with something that's a little more reliable, and maybe that will kind of replace some of our two-day turnaround time, which is, I think, basically what we're getting on the PCR testing.
Yeah, that's what it was for mine. A little less than 48 hours, but and then came through. Dr. Norm, before we let you go, I want to go back to the amount of people who say now, according to polling, they'd be willing to take part in getting a vaccine. What happens if that number stays about where it is? If 40% agree to a vaccine, I in my head have a couple of scenarios rolling around. One of them is the others the 60% who go ahead and get that done, all of a sudden we're seeing miraculous results and numbers drop across the board. It will sort of take care of itself. But if we do not see that immediately, I don't see those numbers moving all that quickly.
I think you make a good point. If we have a very effective vaccine and people can see that it's effective, obviously the population will, I think, be willing to get the vaccines. And the other part of that is, hopefully, knock on wood, we don't see any unanticipated side effects right at the beginning. That would actually absolutely kill the vaccine if all of a sudden, some people pop up with some neurologic diseases right at the beginning of our attempts to vaccinate. And you know how social media is. That would just go wild.
Yeah, and it would also damage the prospects for other companies who are producing vaccines of a different type because, we've seen what vaccines can do. Yeah, no thanks.
Absolutely. That's probably my biggest concern. I think as we move along, yes, people are going to be willing to get the vaccine when they see it's effective and it's not causing side effects. But again, hopefully we won't see any major side effect right at the beginning of the vaccination process.
Outstanding. All right. Well, some light potentially at the end of the tunnel. Dr. Norem, as always, we appreciate the time. We appreciate the expertise. And since we're still in the middle of this and we haven't vaccinated everybody and kicked it out of here, would you be willing to come back next Monday and see what else is new with it?
Absolutely.
We appreciate it.